Hi, Debbie. Welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here. We're going to get into talking about your exciting new book that you've just published, so we'll get to that towards the end. But would like you to tell our guests about your story and how you got into doing what you're doing.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It is my pleasure. I'm grateful for this lovely conversation today. So, about 10 years ago, after the birth of my youngest daughter, I started having some health issues that I couldn't ignore anymore. And that led me down this like long and winding road of autoimmune disease diagnosis and treatment. And um, for quite a long time, I had really given away most of my power to people with MD after their name, right? Some specialists. And I found myself at one point taking like 9 different prescription medications 3 times a day and feeling worse than when I began. And so I slowly started to take my power back just one thing at a time, working on my food, working on how I moved my body, like eliminating toxins, things I could control in my life without asking a doctor's permission.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and that kind of led me eventually to this place where, after a conversation with my rheumatologist, I decided I would step away from my job and try eliminating stress in that way. Thinking if I quit working, I wouldn't have any stress anymore. And that would be like the magic bullet that would fix everything, right? Solve all my
Mm-hmm.
problems. And it wasn't until after I did that that I found myself in like my lowest, deepest, darkest place without a lot of hope, still feeling sick, still in pain, but now really in this emotionally low place. And so where I'm at now and how I moved forward that from that was kind of just trying to claw myself out of that place, and never go back there, really for the sake of my family, for my daughters, not wanting to perpetuate cycles or create new ones. Um, and it happened to be that as I worked on my emotional health, my physical health started to improve too. So I could feel this pain that I had held for so long begin to leave my body. And so I just kept working in that direction. That was enough to just keep me going one step at a time. And so, you know, many bits and pieces in between there, but
Mm-hmm.
that's where I am today. That's how I've arrived at this moment, at least. So
And I feel like that's where most of us come to in this place in this functional place of healing and wellness is we've had a story that's very similar. Many people I interview and talk to and people that I work with have similar stories. And it just gets to be such a long process for people. But you said a phrase that I hear all the time, or I could describe people's behaviors all the time, is they're looking for and hoping for that magic bullet. And
mhm.
if you want to heal almost completely and maybe even completely 100%, you can't keep doing the magic bullet, the magic pill, the magic diet, the magic whatever, we can put, behind that, because there's so many different things. So that was my story too. It's like I just realized that it's not going to be my thyroidectomy that was going to all of a sudden make me better. It's not going to be the treatment that's going to make me better. It's not going to be just the medication that's going to make me better. So it had to unfold in front of me in a slower process. And it sounds like you have a way to help shortcut that journey for people. And that was my goal in starting my business as well. And dealing with the emotions is a huge aspect of that, because of how that lives in your body when you're, traumatized from your
Mhm.
illness. So what are your autoimmune diagnoses?
Okay, so I have something called mixed connective tissue disease. So it's like an overlap autoimmune disease. So for me, it's a combination of lupus and something called relapsing polychondritis, which attacks specifically cartilage.
Mhm.
So it can attack the cartilage in someone's nose and ears, which are very common presentations of it. For me, it had attacked um, the cartilage in my lungs, so my trachea
Mhm.
and bronchioles. And so I had this severe collapse in my lungs. So that was really the first most serious diagnosis that I had. And then many tests and things down the road. Eventually, I was also diagnosed with something called pulmonary hypertension, which is high blood pressure in your lungs
Mm-hmm.
that can quickly cause heart failure. So I had kind of these very dramatic diagnoses that made me, heart and lung disease, question the
Mm-hmm.
longevity of my body and the organs that keep it going.
Yeah, those are pretty intense. I'm sure it took you a while to get diagnosed with everything. Is that
Yeah.
true?
So, I mean, I've heard this and I hear this from so many people, right? Like we feel icky and we need some bit of validation from a doctor. And obviously, if something is wrong in our body, we do need treatment and we need to get it
Mm-hmm.
under control. Um but it's like that search for a diagnosis becomes this, you know, main thing. For me, I have to say, like, I do have markers in my blood that made that process quicker. And at first it just meant like throwing all these medications at it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then I had some physical presentations that were easily seen through tests. And so I think the diagnosis came quicker for me, and then they were maybe wrong and they had to be taken back because I had
Okay.
physical presentations and I had blood work. But I know this heartbreaking and common story that's like going to a doctor and saying something's wrong and not having them believe you and having to become an advocate and find a new doctor and do all of that. So I have bits and pieces of that in my
Mm-hmm.
story for sure. But yeah, I would, it probably took a little less than the pain and heartache it takes some people. When I went at first, I had already had some whispers of some blood work coming up that I just didn't have the time or space for. I didn't want to deal with it. And I just kept pushing, like putting my head down and working. And so when I couldn't ignore things any longer, I went to the doctor that I trusted and I said, I think I need you to run blood work for lupus. And she said, well, maybe you're just aging. I was like 31 at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was like, what? I really liked her. I trusted her.
Mm-hmm.
I felt a good connection with her, but I thought, I don't think this is like a 31-year-old body, what's happening to me. And she thought maybe I had bursitis and things, but that blood work came back showing these markers. And so, yeah, it kind of moved quickly from there. And I would
Okay.
say too quickly, where I had to pull back and say, like, I don't think this is the correct diagnosis. And then they kept doing tests and stuff like
Okay.
that. So
Yeah, I think that I don't know what it is now. The average years to be diagnosed with an autoimmune disease is 10 years or something like that. I think I've
oh,
heard 20 for a lot of people, which is really unfortunate, to be able to
mhm.
start feeling better. So how have they impacted your life? I mean, it seems like it should be pretty obvious, but maybe you can give us some information or details on that because those just seem very debilitating and I'm sure extremely hard to
Yeah.
live with every day.
So physically, how they've impacted my life, I guess, if that's the question. At first, they definitely impacted my life in a way that I had to pull back from the active lifestyle I was living. And so it wasn't until it changed my life in that way that I actually began seeking some sort of medical help. Until
Mm-hmm.
then, I think, like you said, us in this sort of chronic illness, autoimmune disease realm, we have very similar personality types in many cases.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was more about just putting my head down, like hustling and grinding, not complaining, just doing it. And so it wasn't until I was like limping when I walked and I couldn't run anymore and I couldn't mow the lawn and I couldn't hike like I like to
Mm-hmm.
that I started asking for help or seeking some sort of help or diagnosis. But the bigger question, like how has it impacted my life from beginning to end, is such a good one because number one, it's helped me appreciate and see the resiliency of my body,
Mm-hmm.
um, and understand that like these diagnoses aren't truly just a sentence for like this is what is going to happen and this is where you're going to be. But also it's allowed me to see the impermanence of all of these situations in my life, right? In that I don't have anything guaranteed. Not that anyone else does, but this put it right in front of my face
Mm-hmm.
and my husband's face. And because of that, we were able to really begin building the life we wanted now instead of waiting for someday, like when we were tired. And so I'm able to show up in the world in a completely different way than I was before this began. So I can really see it as a gift. Now, getting to that
Mm-hmm.
gift has taken a lot of tears and ugliness and difficulty and wallowing on the couch or hiding under a blanket in my bed. But this is where it's led, to a place that's just how I'm meant to show up in the world, I think, rather than the life I was living before. So,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's something about that where you go through this and have to figure out how to deal with it, and just to know, I like how you say the impermanence of your plight or whatever it is that
mhm,
you are dealing with, and that's the thing, we kind of get told that this is your sentence, this is your life sentence, and you have to just figure out how to live with your new normal.
mhm,
And but that, like you said, there's probably this personality trait that goes into this chronic illness category of people just kind of keep pushing through, and then you come out on the other side, and when you can see it as a gift, I think that that's when you've totally overcome and won against whatever the condition is. That's what it seems like when I've talked to a lot of people. I feel the
mhm.
same way. What medical interventions did you try besides, I know you said it, you were on 9 medications at one point and it didn't exactly help your process?
Yeah. So I feel really fortunate in this place in that when this damage in my lungs was first discovered, I had to have like a procedure, I had to be put under to have that done. And so as I'm waking up from that procedure, the pulmonologist that had done it is talking a family member through what will have to happen because of what they realized, right? And so because there's not cartilage, there's like this severe collapse in my lungs. So when I breathe out, they collapse. And the first simplest intervention for that is to put stents in your lungs.
Mm-hmm.
And anytime you have something foreign like that in your body, it just increases the chance in this moist area for infection, right?
Mm-hmm.
And eventually that just leads to people getting infection in their lungs, being intubated. um, like long term, that's not good. The
Right.
longevity of that isn't good. And then, it leads to like, would I ever be a good candidate for a lung transplant or something like that? And so, um, I really pushed back on that. And so they had me do all these exercise tolerance tests. And for whatever reason, the amount of collapse I have in my lungs is considered like severe. I'm using air quotes.
Sure.
And my body tolerates it fine. And so I was able to do exercise and be okay with it. And my pulmonologist was okay with saying, if you're functioning now, we'll keep going. And as long
Mm-hmm.
as you're doing okay and your lungs are functioning. And so that made me appreciate my body and also just be like, I don't want to take that for granted.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, I'm still on some immunosuppressants. I take some stuff to help modulate my immune system and hopefully help it get under control. And then the other interventions I did, were pulling back too many medications that I was on, and then just doing what I could to maintain my physical health on my own. So I wouldn't call those medical interventions, I
Mm-hmm.
guess, in the way that you're asking the question. Those are the more holistic things that I did. What I'm still doing for treatment is just immunosuppressants, and it took a while to pull back to the few meds that I am on now. But
Mm-hmm.
did I answer your question
Yeah,
very well?
yeah, absolutely. So when it comes to the holistic interventions, what did you do for nutrition? There's this thought that if you have an autoimmune condition, there's nothing you can do
Mm-hmm.
for it. And as a nutritionist, I know that to not be true. I've seen many
Mm-hmm.
people start to lower their markers for autoimmune, their whatever their condition is, and start to decrease their inflammation and start to relieve symptoms just from nutrition. So what types of nutritional intervention did you do in that holistic realm for yourself?
Yeah. So I want to be clear. I'm glad you're a nutritionist. I am not a nutritionist.
Okay.
I have spent years with trial and error
Mm-hmm.
and reading and consuming as much as I can to try to learn about this. The first thing I did was more like elimination diet process, trial and error.
Mm-hmm.
So eliminating sugars and carbohydrates for a while. When I was taking all those medications, I was sick all the time, to
Mm-hmm.
no surprise now in retrospect, right? But
Right.
at the time I was just like, well, this is my plight, this is how it is, I have to take
Mm-hmm.
these. And so I was eating like Hershey's bars and drinking Diet Pepsi, and that was basically what I was subsisting on. And
Mm-hmm.
my husband was like, like, we got to try something here. And luckily he did intervene in that way, because like you're saying, my rheumatologist, and a couple of them, I'm on, I've had several at this point, but
Mm-hmm.
said what you said, like, well, you can try adjusting your food, but it's not going to do anything.
Yeah.
And so first I eliminated sugar and carbs and then tried adding those back in to see how my body adjusted. Eventually I went to like the top 5 allergens
Mm-hmm.
elimination diet and added those back in, which I was shocked made such a huge difference. I
Mm-hmm.
had like eczema, and eliminating dairy took care of my skin, and it actually took care of some seasonal allergies that I had, that an allergist would say is not true, is kind of bunk. But for me, it really has. I don't have to take allergy meds anymore.
It's
And
pretty
from there,
huge.
yeah, I
Mm-hmm.
just kept going, right? So I've done some delayed allergy response tests. I've done the AIP diet,
Mm-hmm.
and then added back in. And so I really have eliminated the foods that I'm allergic to, that I had no idea I was allergic to when
Mm-hmm.
this started, and then just kept trying some other things. Right, so I've tried eliminating nightshades to see if it helped. For me, it doesn't. So
Mm-hmm.
it's definitely not a one size fits all thing. I've tried low FODMAP for a while to see how.
Mm-hmm.
So I've kind of just kept going and trying a lot of
Done
things.
all the things. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that's the thing, but the overarching thing that you did. So for the listeners who are struggling with maybe they're suspicious they have an autoimmune condition, or they just feel a lot of inflammation in the body, and maybe people don't always understand what that means. But if you struggle with pain and headaches and just that, at minimum you have inflammation going on. So by reducing the sugars and the I'm doing air quotes too, the bad sugars, and then
Mhm.
even sometimes the good sugars for a while, like depending on how severe you are. And the good sugars are like the good quality, like starchy carbohydrates, like sweet potatoes and things like that. Even those turn into glucose in your body. And if you are super inflamed, that even might cause problems for you initially when you're starting to heal. So basically what she did was just remove the things that cause inflammation. And that is trial and error. And there is really no one size fits all for that. There's a lot of things that do affect a lot of people, but there's different severity levels, and there's ways to heal that with your eating over time too. So there
Yeah.
is hope for that, for sure.
And what I love about an elimination diet, right? It doesn't take a prescription, it doesn't take a doctor's permission. It's, a very easy way. So it may not be easy. Easy might be the wrong word. Simple
It's simple,
way.
but not always
Yeah.
easy. Yeah.
Yeah. To just kind of see for yourself what might help. And so, I mean, I subsisted on bread and cheese. I would have been
Mm-hmm.
totally fine if that's all I ate, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it turns out I'm allergic to wheat. And like I said, dairy helped these seasonal allergies and my eczema go away,
Mm-hmm.
eliminating those. So the other thing I want to just make a little
Mm-hmm.
tiny point, I'll try to be as brief as I can, is that for me, because I had some like repressed emotions, some trauma I had never dealt with from my childhood, the coping mechanism that I had sort of grown into and used to keep people sort of at arm's length, never be vulnerable or really show myself with people, was this perfectionism tendency and people pleasing.
Mm-hmm.
And so at first, until I became conscious of that and understood it, everything became another way to do that. And so this is why food is so tricky. It's a hard subject, but for me, I over perfected and I over controlled until it was just, I was probably, especially with the AIP diet, that's very, very controlled. I was
Yes.
probably malnourished. I just, I use that as another way to be perfect.
Mm-hmm.
And clearly I wasn't, and it wasn't doing that. But until I could understand that sort of unconscious behavior pattern and unwrap it, I wasn't able to use food in a loving way. And so now I would say, more important than any food item or whatever, this is a way to nourish and love our bodies. And so if we're eating something to cope with something else, unconsciously or consciously, if we're eating it to punish or control ourselves or not eating
Mm-hmm.
it, it's not really going to help long term anyway, because you're doing those same things to your nervous system that are creating the inflammation, right? That you're trying to eliminate.
Right.
And so that was a really important step with me in my food, and to be able to look at it in a healthy way and use it in a loving way to care for myself.
Yes, food is fuel and healing and restorative rather than something to be controlled or to
Mhm.
punish, or how people I mean, that could be a whole nother topic of this episode,
Right.
actually, with emotional eating and that kind of thing. But it's true, you know, we use things in that, being in that perfectionist mindset with things, and it's when you're trying to heal and you're so desperate to feel better, it does cause you to, kind of this mindset, I'm going to do everything perfect, I have to do perfect because I have to feel better yesterday, because we're feeling so horrible. And so,
Mhm.
it's that self-care mindset that has to come right with all of this, and some ease to it. And it's really hard. I wish I would have learned that a long time ago. I'm still learning it. It's still a process. And there's something about a mentality that's hard to move away from that sometimes. But I think that is probably the most important thing we've talked about so far today, really, with people
Thank
getting
you.
better. Yeah,
Yeah.
that was a really
I
good point
mean,
to bring up.
until we are conscious of those things, everything else just becomes a way to add to whatever we're doing, whether it's
Hmm.
money or food or whatever it is, right?
Right. Hmm.
Medications or so. But yeah, and I love the way that you said it, and yeah, it is. I agree. It's the deeper work. It's a bit more tricky than just taking away the cheese or whatever.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, very much so. So this is kind of an obvious question, I guess, but what motivated you to write your book? And then why don't you tell us a little bit about it?
Uh, yeah. So as I was healing, and like I said, I was in that deep, dark place.
Hmm.
I was still searching for something superficial, right? So I was learning this connection between our gut health and our overall health, which is still a very important piece, like
Hmm.
putting all of these together. I went to this local like chiropractor because I was confused by probiotics.
Hmm.
And she kind of saw through that. I just said, I just want a probiotic. Can you recommend one? And she was like, hang on, let's see, like why? And so she started doing some more like somatic and energy work that unlocked what I alluded to earlier,
Right.
some repressed emotions, some trauma. And there was all this synchronicity happening at the same time, right? So I was reading about Brene Brown and releasing shame, and some Glennon Doyle. I don't know if you're familiar with her.
Mm-mm.
And that's where I was learning about my perfectionism, my people pleasing, kind of being addicted to that and having to step back from that. Um, and I was reading about journaling to heal and beginning to use that. Eventually like led to Gabor Mate, the When the Body Says No. Have you heard of that book? Have you
Mm-mm.
read
I'm
that?
not
So
either.
good. And then Bessel van der Kolk, a book in the same kind of light called When the Body Keeps the Score. And so they talk about our fight or flight response, our nervous system, these personality types that we've said are kind of common with people with these types of diseases, and repressed trauma, some trauma in our past. And so all of this was happening at the same time, and I'm journaling to heal, and I'm finding a lot of healing from working on my emotional state as much as I'm working on my physical state, right? Through food and diet and or diet and food are the same thing, but
Yeah.
nutrition,
Yeah.
supplements, exercise. Um, and the more I wrote, the more healing I found. And so at first it was just a matter of like, getting this out of my body, feeling better, healing for myself and my family. Um, and then it just became a full story, an
Hmm.
arc from beginning to end. I've heard so many women in particular, they're tired, they're burned out, they're sick, they don't know what to do, they can't find answers, they ask for help.
Hmm.
And this was kind of a similar story arc that I was hearing and seeing with the women that were coming to me. And so the greater hope was, by hearing my story, reading my story, maybe they could find something in it that might help them heal as well. And the book just developed like intuitively, naturally from there.
Hmm.
So
Sounds like it, just through that process that you started learning about of journaling for healing. So
yeah.
it went right along with it. So I love the name of it. Can you tell us about that?
Sure. It's called The Other Side of Perfect, Discovering the Mind Body Connection to Healing Chronic Illness.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, that's really about me peeling off these layers, these misconceptions I had about perfectionism, thinking my life was, about becoming more and more perfect as I went
Hmm.
along, the perfect wife, the perfect mom, the perfect teacher when I was working,
Hmm.
the perfect whatever. And being in that dark place and realizing, like, that's not it. I've been trying to be perfect all along, make everyone happy, and I didn't know who I was. Perfect wasn't doing anything. I was sick and tired and just emotionally done. And so learning to peel away all those things and just become really who I was. So,
Hmm.
yeah.
That sounds amazing. And that book is available starting, it was published February 1st of this year, 2021, correct?
Yeah.
And
So, yeah.
yeah, where is it available?
Anywhere really you buy books online. So
Hmm.
Amazon, Barnes and Noble, it's on Walmart, or you can go to gobucketyourself.com/books.
Okay.
And there's a link there that'll take you to that. Um, yeah. So
Yeah.
wherever people prefer to buy their books.
Yeah, that will be in the show notes, your link to the book, as well as I'm going to put some of those resources that you mentioned for people to be able to access to that helped your process too. So that would be, I think that would be really informative. I've not heard of a lot of those things, but the one, the one book you mentioned, When the Body Keeps a Score,
Hmm.
that sounds pretty interesting, because I think that this really relates to a lot of people. I think a lot your story, even if people don't have the same autoimmune diagnoses, or maybe they don't even know if they have anything that's diagnosable at this point.
Hmm.
I think a lot of people can relate to this story in one way or another. And have you found in talking with people in your reading and research and writing your book that this is really not, I shouldn't, I'm not trying to discriminate, but I feel like I hear women saying this kind of thing all the time. And is it because it doesn't either A, happen to men as much, or B, are men not speaking about it as much? Have you come across any information on that?
Yeah. I mean, my response is all speculative, sort of. I don't
Mm-hmm.
have any statistics offhand. I think that in the book, When the Body Says No by Gabor Mate, he does talk about this link between certain chronic illnesses and autoimmune diseases and personality type.
Mm-hmm.
And just being a pleasant people pleaser, not wanting to rock the boat, kind of go with the flow, um, tends to go a bit more with female, like stereotypical gender roles we
Sure.
give to women.
Mm-hmm.
But overall, women do have more autoimmune disease,
Mm-hmm.
and I think do really statistically have a harder time being diagnosed. And I think that is attributed to our personality, whether
Yeah.
we're taught that or that's how we are, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, a woman convincing maybe a male doctor that something's going on with her are very common stories that I hear, at least
Mm-hmm.
trying to convince. Um, and so, but there is research, Gabor Mate and then Bessel van der Kolk's When the Body Keeps the Score. Those really talk about the nervous system and our nervous response. And when we don't deal with our emotions or some trauma that we've been through. It's really hard to be an adult and not have gone through some sort of
Right.
trauma, right? That's,
Yeah.
we get here, we go through some things along the way. And without dealing with those, our nervous system tends to be in this fight or flight response. And so, what seems mystical and magical, like this connection between my emotional state and my physical state,
Hmm.
really, there's a chemical, hormonal, measurable reason that happens, right?
Right.
We release, we put our bodies in a state of fight or flight for whatever reason, just like constant stress or this trauma that we haven't dealt with. And we're releasing hormones and chemicals that are not meant to be released frequently. And so
Right.
those create diseases, right? Heart
Hmm.
disease, lung disease, physical illnesses in our body because we're not allowing our body to have those other rest, digest, heal hormones as often. So those books dive into that and the real scientific side of it. But yeah, I think there is a link to women, and
Hmm.
it has to do with our common personality or wanting to please and not rock the boat or afraid to
Sure.
speak up or just how we're perceived gender wise. So,
Yeah, and just a couple of things you were saying makes me think about how I feel like our society, especially in the United States, and it's probably like this in other countries too, that we sort of tend to look outside of ourselves for the answers
mhm,
or the reasons why we feel the way we feel. And, we're not looking inward at all and not making that connection. And I think it's starting to be more, I mean, there's more and more research, more and more research resources about that. There's many more studies and, actual scientific documented studies on the connection between the mind body healing and that kind of thing.
mhm.
So I think again that highlights the importance of making those connections for faster healing. So um, anyway, is there anything else you'd like to talk about? I think you have given the audience a ton of information to think about, and I'm excited to read your book myself. So
Yeah, I think that's all good. Just like going off of what you said, I think anytime we're looking outside of ourselves for whatever we need internally, right?
hmm.
Happiness or uh, being better, getting good, right?
Hmm.
We're setting ourselves up for some heartbreak. And so like you said, it took a while to realize these things. It's taken me years to realize
Hmm.
certain things. That was my path. I don't know any other way. I guess that when the student's ready, the teacher appears, right?
Right.
But if we're seeking a diagnosis, then thinking we're going to be better, we're
Hmm.
probably setting ourselves up for heartbreak. If we think, well, if I could just do this, then things would be better, we're setting ourselves,
Right.
whatever it could be our health, but it could just be, if I get the bigger house, I'm going to be happy. If I get the better
Yeah.
car, I'm going to be happy. Um, so I think those things are internal, not to say we can't get these other things if they're important to us and what we value, but it goes with our health as well.
Hmm.
Going to a doctor and having that doctor say, yeah, you're right, there is something wrong with you, won't lead to better health just in
Oh,
and of itself. It doesn't work
no.
that way. So, yeah, I would just encourage people to feel empowered in and of themselves and know uh, that they can trust their intuition and do the things they're feeling led to do. If you're feeling sick and tired and burned out, then you're sick and tired and burned out. You
Right.
don't need someone else to tell you that. And empower yourself to do and make the choices that are right for you and your body, for sure.
Hmm. Yeah, be your own best advocate, stand up for yourself.
Mhm.
If you don't feel like you're getting answers, keep knocking on other doors and that kind of thing. And so it's
Mhm.
sometimes a hard lesson to learn. I think people get sort of paralyzed with, well, they're the doctor, they know better. I guess I am, um, I'm just overly stressed or overly worried. It's me, it's my
Mhm.
problem. I'll change my thinking. And so, we need to, like you said, empower ourselves. And people like you writing books like you've written are going to help people figure that out. So thank you so much for being here. I highly recommend people check out the book, The Other Side of Perfect, Discovering the Mind-Body Connection to Healing Chronic Illness. And it's available everywhere you buy online books. The link will be in the show notes. Have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you.